Hello and welcome to Newspeak. Yes, do not adjust your set. We actually have a brand new set. I do hope you approve for our shows. In fact, all of our shows, we're gradually kind of introducing them. Not quite complete yet, but I hope you appreciate the new look. With me, as usual though, thank goodness, is Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow and Royal Historian, and Amy Gallagher, formerly the mayoral candidate for the SCP. I suppose we've got to stop saying that, really,
yes,
haven't we? Yeah. And the woman behind Stand Up to Woke campaign. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about really the only real issue this week, which is the general election. Just before that, though, we've got one notice of a locals event coming up this week. It's on Tuesday, the 28th of May, and it's in Exeter. Tuesday, 28th of May in Exeter. Rafe, you're going to be there, aren't you?
I shall.
So come along and hear Rafe speak. And that will be obviously in the evening. It's entirely free. The events are proving extremely popular around the country, pleased to say. So do come along. If you want to find out the details of where and when, then just write to locals at newcultureforum.org.uk. Exeter on Tuesday the 28th. Well, election was announced. First of all, wasn't it a bizarre announcement in the rain? I mean, didn't you?
Very bizarre. And we also had Things Can Only Get Better playing in the background, courtesy of Steve Bray, who, if people don't know, he's a kind of anti-Brexit, anti-Tory activist who is always around Westminster. It was very strange. It seemed to be no thought put into it, and I think it was interesting because this song was sort of played as though it's obviously the New Labour song, yeah. But it was played as though it's a sort of an anti-Tory song. But I thought it was quite fitting actually, because after 14 years of the Tory government, it's just been a continuation of Blair, really. Yes. So it suited them. It didn't seem to be anti-Tory. It seemed to be kind of representative of the Tories, yeah. Actually, that song. And it was very strange that he felt that he needed to go outside and do it in the rain without any covering. Maybe it was just, he just didn't think about it, but it kind of does summarise the Tories, doesn't it?
It's symbolic.
But really does. Yeah, I mean, well, the whole thing's been off to a terrible start because today the Prime Minister, I don't know who's advising him on all of these things, the Prime Minister was in Northern Ireland and he went to the Titanic Quarter. Now, if you don't want to, again, in terms of a nice summary of the future of the Tory party, who's advising this guy? Because, the cartoons sort of make themselves when you think about, a sinking ship and rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and all of this. I mean, the sight of Sunak in the rain, as you say, with New Labour's great thing, when we're getting rid of John Major, absolutely drenched as a rat, or as Roland Rat. And as he walked away, I did a tweet of this wonderful picture of him absolutely soaked to the skin, yeah. and I said nothing is more fitting for the last 14 years than an image of a wet Tory, because that's what we've had, wet Tories, or as Terry Thomas would say, yeah. An absolute shower.
Absolute shower.
And yeah. And I just think it just goes to show that they spent £5 million creating during COVID this press centre within 10 Downing Street. Do you remember that oak panelled thing? That was there to use. Why on earth didn't you do that? I mean, it just beggars the mind.
Yeah, it's sort of it's interesting, because I think Matt Goodwin released this kind of poll just yesterday, and it was saying, who do you trust on the economy, on migration, and on lots of other things, and basically, it came out of most people not trusting either of them. I mean, it was very, very clear, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was clear that it was very low. It was kind of in the 30s or 40% of who yeah. they trust. But it was always Labour on top of the Tories, i.e. getting more votes. Even on issues like immigration and the NHS, that the Labour were polling higher than the Tories. I don't think that there's necessarily a swell of enthusiasm or hope in Labour. I think it's just that people are so demoralised by the Tories that they I'm hearing people who are even kind of on our side of the political spectrum, Conservatives, who are just sort of saying, we'll just let the other lot have a go, because they're so they're so they don't believe in anything the Tories are saying, and they feel so let down by the Tories that even though Labour represent everything that they disagree with, they're willing to just say, well, give them a shot.
I mean, Labour have always been most trusted on the NHS. But what was most telling about Matt Goodwin's poll was that twice the number of people trust the Labour Party on the economy. Now that is quite remarkable, because that was the one thing, that and defence were the two things you would expect the Tories, and of course it just goes to show the legacy of Liz Truss and the damage that that caused to the party. And you can only sort of imagine how the polling would be today if Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister. I never cared for Boris Johnson myself, but it's, I do wonder how the polling would look at this time.
Yes. What do you make of this whole thing as well with Nigel Farage? Right. I mean, obviously people would know at home, but there was this great sort of anticipation. What's he going to say? What's he going to do? Is he going to stand? And then the Reform are going to have this press conference, and then he issues, first thing in the morning, just a written statement, didn't he?
Yeah, a written statement in which he said that his priority, he said that essentially there's no future here because it's either going to be Tory or Labour. Neither of them offer any hope for the country. Reform is the only hope. But then he says, well, but my priorities lie elsewhere. He said, America is of much more global significance, and I need to focus my priorities on that. And you would have thought, well, wait a minute, this election is going to be on July the 4th, American Independence Day. The American election isn't until our Guy Fawkes Day, November the 5th. That gives them a full 4 months to go over and do that. I think it was badly mishandled. It was a rare misstep for Nigel Farage, who normally understands the feeling of the voters, GB News viewers, and Reform Party members, and so forth. And I think there's been a lot of backlash against that. And I think he may be regretting not only his decision, but the way in which he released the statement. And then he came back today and said the most bizarre thing, saying that, well, actually, I had planned to become an MP. I was going to announce that I was going to be an MP next week. And that's why Rishi Sunak called the general election. Sunak got the willies, and this was the reason. And but Ben Habib said, well, I'm the deputy leader of the Reform Party. I never knew that he was going to be standing next week. But if you're going to stand as an MP, what difference does it make if Sunak is going to call an election?
Also, it's rather grand, actually, to assume, that they would actually sort of, when they got wind of him standing, that's why they called the election.
Yes, it is a bit. It's a bit grandiose. I mean, as I understand it, what he's now claiming is that he was going to announce that he was going to be an MP, not the leader of Reform, just an MP, which would have meant that he would have been concentrating on that particular constituency. I don't know that would necessarily lead Rishi Sunak to call a general election. That seems a bit extreme. I mean, maybe if he was going to announce that he was going to be the leader of Reform, that might change things, but he would only have been appealing to the voters in that particular area. Yeah. And equally, even with whether he runs as an MP or not, he could still campaign for Reform regardless. So I don't necessarily know that it would have made much difference. And as Rafe says, this letter that he's put out is a bit bizarre, because part of Farage's whole brand is patriotism and wanting Britain to be sovereign. And then he puts out this letter essentially saying that America's far more important. I do see his point. I think the American election is very important for Western civilization and geopolitically and so on. But it seemed uncharacteristic of him to put it in such a blunt way and essentially to say, I don't really care about what happens in Britain, because that's what he's been known for the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it didn't need saying, did it? That's the thing.
Yeah, it didn't need to be said, and I think people in the Reform Party were hoping he wouldn't say something like this. Yes. And also it was the timing, because actually yesterday, when we're recording this on a Friday, on Thursday, we had the Office for National Statistics came out with the new migration figures, which showed a 10% reduction in net migration, but still huge, still 600,000. And this Reform Party press conference had been announced in order to discuss the migration issues, essentially electioneering on that in a certain sense. And the decision of Nigel to then release this statement meant that the entire press conference was overshadowed by it and got very little coverage at all.
What do you think is the difference, actually? What difference do you think it will make, Nigel not being there to Reform?
I think it's monumentally huge, because Tice is fine, but he's not a Nigel Farage. You need to have that sort of Boris Johnson charismatic figure, that Nigel Farage. He's a person who is a campaigner. This is his great skill. Not even in Parliament, and he was able to get a Brexit referendum for the nation. And I think it's the loss of a huge asset, because he is one of the great communicators. And I think if they had put immigration front and forefront, at the forefront of their manifesto policies, and have him championing that, I think you could have seen a huge swing towards the Reform Party, enough to actually pose a real existential crisis to the Tory party. So the Tory party actually may do better than we were expecting because of this, I would think.
I mean, he is saying he's going to campaign for the next 6 weeks on behalf of Reform. And he's taken time out of GB News to do that, so that might help. But what that will look like, we don't know. I mean, I guess, in the next 6 weeks, it might benefit the smaller parties in terms of the fact that there's a kind of there's a limit to which they can spend, and that they can get their message out quite quickly. I don't know that Nigel Farage will necessarily do that. We'll have to see what they run on. I suspect it will be immigration. It all depends on how much of a big of a thing. But he's put in that letter, it seems to be that he's saying it's not that important to me. So even if he does come out with a really strong campaign over the next 6 weeks or so, he's kind of put the dampeners on it already. It's hard for people to sort of get over that.
I also saw something. I mean, I have to say, I always thought that he would go to America, because I think that was his plan, possibly at the last election that Trump lost. That hence he didn't go. But I think that was the point behind it. But so now he can. But it seems to me that it's just odd that he should talk about standing for an election in 2029. Did you read this?
No, I didn't see that.
But basically, I've still got one big thing left in me, which is rather an inelegant way of putting it, but he's still got one political thing left in him. Maybe that is the American thing. I don't know. What could constitutionally Trump give Nigel? Could he actually give him a role that's not, if you like, just a campaigning or advisory role?
Yeah, there's no bar on anything like that. You could even become an ambassador if you wanted to.
Could he?
I don't think there's any citizenship requirement for that, as far as I know. I mean, I don't know if there is, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some role that he could be given in that capacity. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert on the American Constitution, but I wouldn't see why that would be a bar. I mean, it'd be controversial. I don't see it happening. I mean, that's the first thing. I don't think that would happen, but. Who knows? But also remember, he's got a Fox News contract as well. I think he did have, and America's a much more lucrative market than the UK is, and so if he can make a name for himself over the course of the election campaign, it would open up all sorts of opportunities to him. Remember, he was hoping at one point to become the British ambassador to America, right? And Trump had sort of suggested that might be a good appointment. Obviously, Boris Johnson was having none of that, and I don't think Keir Starmer will be open to that either.
And another thing that's quite interesting is David Frost, Lord Frost, who was the chief negotiator of the Brexit deal. He's now been basically nixed, hasn't he, by the Tory party? What's that about? What's that?
Well, this isn't the first we've heard about it. There was an article in the Telegraph about a month ago by Alison Pearson about how generally very high quality candidates within the Conservative Party who are to the right of the party were not being put forward, were being rejected. They were being stopped in terms of progressing in terms of the party. And it does seem to be there is a push to push forward centrist candidates or candidates that
still doing that.
Yeah, they're still doing that, and that David Frost would fit that. He's a very high quality candidate, but he is to the right of the party, and he opposed Boris Johnson. So it seems that those kind of candidates are being deterred, which just shows that they've learned nothing. They are still working in that centrist Blairite paradigm that doesn't want to see anybody that passionately believes in conservatism, and that's their downfall, and they're still doing it essentially.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. But in Lord Frost's case, it's also the fact that he's been one of the main movers behind the scenes to try to oust Rishi Sunak, and he's been leading a lot of those discussions and a lot of the push to try to replace him. And that's the principal reason that he in particular has been banned from standing.
It's interesting. Was that actually really a thing, this getting rid of Sunak? I mean,
it had no chance of succeeding, but there were people who were actively engaged in that. But they'd never get enough letters put in but certainly he was one of the key architects behind all of that.
Do you think? I mean, when I look at the forthcoming 6 weeks or whatever it is, I sort of feel all the things that we talk about on this show and all the other shows and everything will not really be discussed. Now, I mean, I don't know how it's shaping up, but is there going to be like, they usually try to set the agenda for a week, don't they? Is there going to be an immigration week? I don't think so. Or rather, they will do everything they can, surely, not to discuss this.
Well,
Yeah,
there's definitely going to be a small boat issue because, of course, he's going to be judged against his 5 pledges, to reduce NHS waiting lists, lower inflation, grow the economy, and stop the small boats. Although, of course, he never mentioned anything about legal immigration. And, of course, I mean, this is, we have to discuss, actually, why is this election being called 8 months earlier than he had to do it? And, as dire as we think that the country is, from a Tory perspective, things cannot get better. This was actually because you've got for the first time you've got Britain's economy outpacing America, France, and Germany, but using really disingenuous statistics. In the last quarter, it's barely outperformed America. No serious economist looks at that, right? In the last year, America's economy has grown by 3.5% or something. Ours has grown by 0.3%. Since COVID, America's economy has grown by 8%. Ours has grown by, I think, 1.2%. But he can at least get that headline of our economy is growing faster than them. No planes are going to take off for Rwanda in July. I mean, again, July the 4th is the date for this election, primarily because he knows he's going to be embarrassed. This was the core of his of his position, was that we were going to have successful flights taking off, and he wants people to again have faith. They are going to go off in July. Well, that's pretty obvious. We've got a new high for illegal migrants coming across the channel now. In the last 3 months, they're higher than ever. And there's a real, I said this last year, I thought it was going to be in May this election was going to be called, because, this summer we will see even more migrants coming over the channel. And I think he's hoping people will see the migrants who are here already fleeing to Ireland as evidence of the Rwanda scheme working. Well, yeah, people who are here might be scared by Rwanda going to Ireland, but it's not deterring people in Europe from still coming over here. And at the same time, inflation's at a record low right now, and energy prices are low. But actually, when you get to the autumn and the winter, they're expecting there to be another spike in energy prices. So right now, economically, and with the boats and migrants, they think, well, actually, we can hoodwink the public into thinking actually that the plan is working, which is their code for it's their platform policies message. And in a few months, actually, things could look very different.
Yes. And it's also the case that NHS waiting lists are lower in the summer. And obviously, the NHS is Labour's big thing that they push for. Probably, more younger people will vote for and campaign for Labour, and they're all going to be in exams during the summer. So there's that. I think there's a Grenfell inquiry report coming out around September, which may make the government look bad. So I think he's probably factoring that as well. I think there's probably a lot of things factored in, and as Ray said, that inflation's low, so he's probably decided to call it in the summer. But it does feel like it's kind of happened very quickly. All the people that I know that are within the Conservative Party, within association, said they never saw this coming. And the announcement kind of looked as though it was done in a blind panic. So maybe he's just suddenly realised that actually the accumulation of things has meant actually let's do it now. But in terms of immigration, it's really interesting because recently Keir Starmer put out these 6 pledges. He called it My First Steps for Change. And he put down reduce the NHS waiting list, increase the amount of teachers that are recruited, but he didn't mention mass immigration and he didn't mention housing. That's not part of their pledges. So it would seem that is the thing that the Conservatives should really be pushing for in terms of their campaigning, but it's very hard for them to do so because they've absolutely failed on immigration. So we see that the two main parties, Labour and Conservative, are basically ignoring this huge, massive issue that people care about most, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to have discussions, aren't we, about housing, during which migration is not mentioned once. This is what is so demoralising. I mean, we're used to this, watching it on the media and everything, but I mean, during an election campaign, we're going to have that. The Tories won't want to mention it either. They barely accept it. I mean, it's the chief reason for the housing crisis. It's not just one of them.
But at least the rest of us can now talk about it. I remember 20 years ago, I linked the housing crisis to immigration, and my God, the backlash I got at the time, because people thought, literally people thought you're an extremist for even, it's clear mathematics of supply and demand. Now that Overton window has moved, And so you do get actually some Tory MPs discussing it, Robert Jenrick and others. You know, the Reform Party will talk about this issue, the SDP will talk about this issue. So actually, at least it's being discussed in the marketplace of ideas. It's just the fact that our two dinosaur parties refuse to address it from an executive position.
Yeah, I think, actually, just go back a bit, just to, actually on the Farage thing, but it's sort of related. Don't you think that taking Farage out of the equation has actually clarified the situation a bit? I mean, in the sense that, I mean, a lot of people that we talk to, they who are concerned about migration, concerned about radical Islam, concerned about all of these things. The constant complaint is there's no one for us to vote for, you know. But Nigel was the kind of, you know, he was like the one possibility. Now that he's ruled himself out, you know that you've got reform. In an odd way, I would have thought there's a chance for something possibly new coming after this election.
Yeah, I mean, my advice, yeah, absolutely. What we said for a long time, you know, an immigration party, something formed along, just a single issue party could do for immigration what UKIP did for Brexit, for the referendum rather, and what the Brexit Party did for Brexit. And my advice to the Reform Party, if you're listening, is essentially to forget getting mired down in too many details and too many policies, because this is really a protest vote. And if you make your entire case about immigration, put that front and centre, and campaign almost exclusively. I mean, you can always have the other policies too, but let this be known that this is about immigration. I think that would actually be the best solution now for the Reform Party to really gnaw away at the Conservative vote.
Yeah, and if they don't, then maybe, you know, and they do worse than they otherwise could have done, then maybe there'll be something else, you know. I think that is kind of clarified. We know, because in all of these discussions, it always came down to, well, let's wait and see what Nigel does. Yeah. Or if people wanted to start something, it was, yes, but what if Nigel then comes back? He'll blow us out of the water, do you know? That's gone now.
It all revolves around Nigel. I think you know, Richard Tyson, Ben Habib, they're very good at talking about immigration, but actually the reform policy on immigration isn't that great, and a lot of people feel like, well, is this you know, I might as well vote Tory because they've got this kind of one in, one out policy, which actually doesn't tackle the real problem of mass immigration as we would like it to be tackled. So it may well be that, you know, as you say, something new emerges after this election. It feels like there is a real strong need for it.
Oh, okay.
My God!
I mean, that would be just like a fresh water in a desert, you know, if something like that happened.
I think we should probably explain to our viewers what the Reform Party's policy actually means on this. Net zero immigration. I forget the number. Was it 400,000 that they said?
He used that as an example.
So the idea is, if 400,000 people leave the country, that means 400,000 can come in. Now that's fine for an economic argument, even though those who are coming in are actually not as economically productive as those who are leaving, but it doesn't address at all the cultural issue, because the people who are leaving and the people who are arriving are vastly different. You're talking about, you know, white flight, you're talking about a brain drain of the very best who are going to America for new careers, and the elderly who are retiring to Spain, to Australia, Canada and elsewhere. So there's a cultural change that happens when you export the existing British-born population and import a foreign population who don't have those cultural affinities and ties to this country.
But somehow Reform have managed to kind of play a bit of a blinder in that people don't quite understand that, so that they just think they're going to be very much tougher. Well, they will be tougher, I suppose, but let's face it, not difficult, is it, when you look at how it's been going. But I mean, to me, I think it's probably this use of this word net zero, this phrase, which they probably thought that they stumbled on something rather clever, but even the original net zero phrase is now out of favour, isn't it? You know, so
I don't know why they've advocated for this policy, really. So whenever you see Ben Habib in interviews, he talks about how we're in a complete existential crisis, we need to save Britain. I like the rhetoric, I like what he says, But then you think, but your policies don't really reflect that. So it seems odd. And I think it comes back to probably that they are, broadly speaking, a kind of Thatcherite free market party that doesn't place much emphasis on culture. And that is the thing that a lot of people care about.
And what's remarkable, I think, is that, if you look at the New Conservatives, this wing of the Conservative Party, which is actually pretty much on side with everything that we say on the cultural issue, Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger, they and the Reform Party, when they talk about what's a reasonable level of immigration, they're still saying things in the hundreds of thousands as being literally, and that's how the people have forgotten what was normal migration. In the 80s and 90s, it was 50,000 people a year was normal. 200,000 is not normal. We get, in the last year, we had 50,000 illegal immigrants coming over the channel. So our illegal migrant rate is what actually our complete migration rate was in the 80s and 90s. And yet, for some reason, even people on the right don't seem to understand this any longer.
Yeah, or willfully don't get it. While we're on the subject of reform, presumably, SDP is standing some candidates.
Yes,
Are you standing?
I don't think so, no.
You don't think so, no? You've had enough with the mayoralty thing?
But our national coordinator is Stephen Ballock.
Yes,
he's standing in Ealing.
Yes, indeed he is. And good luck to him. But I think the point really is that with the smaller parties, if you could say Reform, right? UKIP, when it was a small party, got 4 million votes, 1 MP. I would have thought that maybe Reform could get up to maybe like 2 million or something like that. I don't know, just pure speculation, end up with nothing. So we're back to this whole thing, we need to change the electoral system. Now, I think there's very little to lose by changing. You don't agree, do you?
Well, the reality is that the mathematics just don't simply work in our favour, because this country is 60 to 65% left-leaning. The reason that we've had Tory majority governments is because there's been only one right-wing party, as opposed to on the left, where the vote is split between Lib Dem, Labour, Green and SNP. That's why the left have begun to realise this. That's why they have these sort of pacts going on, and people are lending their vote to the Labour Party to try to oust the Tories. Simply put, and the demographics don't work either, because actually people over 70 and over 50 vote more Tory, but every younger demographic, the Tory vote is minuscule and tiny. So if you have PR in 20, 30 years, well, not in 20 years from now, I think the chance of ever having a right-wing government are for the birds. It's not going to happen. And so we have to think, the only chance of ensuring we possibly will have a Conservative government in the future is by keeping first past the post. And I understand it's frustrating not to get a single MP, but what's the purpose of having 2 or 3 MPs in Parliament under PR if they're never actually going to be enough of them to form a government?
But problem is that assumes we can still get a Conservative government under first past the post. I mean, I would say that actually that one's gone as well.
Well, at the moment it hasn't gone, but the thing is, I think we're going to have at least 10 years of Labour. So by that point, the demographics. I mean, the fact is the Conservative Party loses 2% of its voters every year. In the last 5 years, 10% of Tory voters have died. Thousands of Tory voters die every day, and they're not being replenished because we have the most radically left-wing youth ever. This is a demographic time bomb for the right, and I've been saying for years, why has the Tory party never tried to address this? They've never done anything for the youth of this country. Everything is, the pension lock, everything is trying to placate the Blue Rinse Brigade, and it's a false, it's just basically you're just hastening your own demise.
For those of you viewers who don't know that reference, by the way, blue rinse was in fact used to mean the grassroots, and these ladies who had their hair blue rinsed. And so we're talking about the 1960s and 70s, but I get what you mean.
But it feels like such a lost opportunity, because the thing that really affects young people is housing. And we know that around 90% of the shortage of housing is caused by immigration. So the Conservatives really could speak to the young people about starting family and homes and having a life that they could build in this country, but they've just totally failed on that.
But you see, I'm not convinced that the young people,
if you want that, you said it to
I
them.
still think that they would be diversity and all the rest of it. Even if it proved to be the case that by putting a huge stop on it, you could build more houses, etc. I think that they would still sort of go along with their kind of left-wing credentials. I think that's the point.
Well, there's a point I want to make more broadly, and I think that this general election is yet another betrayal of the British public and of right-leaning British public, and it's once again the Tory party putting itself before nation, by which I mean they had 8 months left where they could have actually, if they really wanted to, knowing, because the fact is they're going to lose either way, and they had 8 months left where they could have tried to put through as much proper legislation as possible on a whole slew of issues to try to at least do damage limitation against the Labour Party coming in by putting in proper legislation on a conservative footing. Instead of that, they're doing damage limitation for their own seats. Sunak is trying to save the jobs of his friends in Parliament by doing the election now, whereas in effect, if he was really interested in the British public, he would be putting through a whole raft of legislation over the next 8 months.
What's the betting that actually by the end of the year he's ensconced in some kind of Californian job, sort of with a big tech company or a finance company or something?
Yeah, most certainly. I think he's could probably be glad to see the back of the Tory party. I mean, he's trying to, as Ray said, he's just trying to manage. I don't think he had this whole smoking ban. I think that's gone by the wayside. That was supposed to be part of his legacy.
Silver lining to everything.
Well, exactly. Exactly. But I mean, I think he's just very much concerned with optics and managing seats, and they have no kind of sense of the long term. As you said, I mean, some of the things that Labour are going to bring in, they're going to bring in a Race Equality Act, which is going to be on top of the Equality Act, which will essentially mean all companies will have to show kind of any disparities in pay amongst races, and that will be linked to kind of racism, just extreme kind of radical policies around Islamophobia and extending the definition where you'll be hardly able to critique Islam. These are really serious things, and if I've never got the sense that Sunak really cares about these issues, or if he does, he doesn't articulate it. And you do just think, do you really understand as a party what we're facing? And you don't get a sense from any of them that they do. They're sort of carrying on business as usual.
Yeah, I think actually that they don't understand. They don't think about it. I don't think he thinks about it. When he briefly came out with something about, was it not Batley, the grammar school, but it was something to do with the demonstrations in Gaza. You had this feeling that actually this was kind of new territory for him, just by way of ending, I don't know about you, but back in the days when we used to just have news at 6 o'clock and then at 10 o'clock in the evening, I used to get actively excited waiting to see what had happened in the election that day. Okay, I mean, those days are gone, I know, but are you going to be following this? Are you going to be following it like daily? I mean, over and above that you keep in touch because of what we do and everything.
I'm a political junkie since I was a child, so American elections, British elections, right. I follow them closely. I'm a bit of an anorak on that front.
Wait a minute, haven't we actually got also French elections, haven't we?
There's a lot of elections this year.
This is the year of elections.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think there are more elections taking place than at any other point in history.
So in other words, you will be, following it all?
Yeah, I will be. I think particularly because it's only 6 weeks. I feel quite pleased that it's going to be over one way or the other. I did feel like an election in October or November was a bit of a drag. So that it is this quite short burst of campaigning. I probably will be following it a bit more. Yeah.
Shall we do predictions now so we can revisit in 6 weeks?
Well, I was going to say, why not? What's your?
I think you're going to have the Tories will be left with 100 seats or so, between 100 and 120 seats.
That is a wipeout then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be a wipeout for the Tories. I think we'll see a lot of quite high-profile ministers losing their seats. Particularly Jeremy Hunt. I mean, it's now forecast that he might lose his seat. He'll be the first Chancellor to lose his seat. I think it'd be terrible for the Tories, but I don't think that we will get a kind of 1997 Blairite, enthusiasm for Labour. I think that Labour will win, but I don't think it will be as strong as the previous years.
Yeah. What is it? What are they actually at the moment? Is it 20 points ahead?
Yeah, 20 points ahead.
It's narrowed a bit. It will narrow a bit, won't it?
Yeah. I think they'll have the biggest majority the Labour Party's ever had. It'll be a 200 seat majority, but they won't have the enthusiasm behind them, because people aren't voting for
No.
Keir Starmer, they're voting against Rishi Sunak,
No.
whereas people were voting for Tony Blair.
Yeah, we saw people putting Blair in the windows of their houses. Everybody, loved Blair. We don't see that for Starmer.
I reckon I will do the other prediction, and that's turnout, which is a bit of a cop-out. But anyway, I'd say probably lowish. So 65 to 70. This country's historically always had a very good turnout, hasn't it? I mean, in the 70s, it dipped in the early part of this century, went right down to about 50-something, actually. But back in the 50s, it was 82% of people voted. I'd say around 65 to 70%. Anyway, but of course we're going to be covering the election on this show every week. Our brand new set, which I hope you like, and because we love it. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks very, very much, Amy. Thanks, Rafe. And we shall see you next week with more election news and other Big Swan events that come along. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.